On Mother's Day, I heard the soft crunch of tires on the gravel before I even saw his car. My heart fluttered the way it always did when my son came home, a mix of love, gratitude, and the quiet ache only a mother understands. For a moment, I let myself believe today would be simple, warm, peaceful, a moment full of hope before everything shifted beneath my feet. I stood at the doorway with a dish towel still in my hand. The morning sun spilled across my porch, turning the world gold and forgiving, as if God himself had paused the day just for me. But peace has a way of slipping between your fingers. David stepped out of his sleek black Tesla, the paint reflecting Sunday light like a mirror. In his hands was a bouquet, lilies my favorite, wrapped in white paper tied with a soft blue ribbon. He used to bring dandelions from the front yard when he was little. Funny how flowers grow more expensive, but the memories stay simple. He walked toward me, handsome as always, but there was something in his eyes, distance, exhaustion, the faint shadow of a man carrying more weight than he could admit. He kissed my cheek, handed me the bouquet, and stepped inside as if rushing against time. I followed him with a trembling smile. I should have known then. I should have felt a shift. David placed the flowers on the dining table. The morning light fell on them like a blessing. Then he turned to me, gentle, but with a hesitation that made my stomach tighten. "Mom," he said softly, "Clara still sends you the $5,000 every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." The room tilted. My breath vanished. $5,000. He said it so casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. But for 8 months, I had been stretching every dollar, living mostly on donated bread and the church's pantry bags. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. My voice came out thin, barely there. "Son, the church is helping me get by." His smile disappeared, erased like chalk in rain. A cold flicker crossed his face, confusion, then worry. But before he could speak again, the rhythm of high heels echoed down the hallway. She appeared like a scene from a glossy magazine. Clara, my daughter-in-law, walked in wearing a pale rose silk dress that hugged her figure like it was tailored by angels. A gold necklace glimmered at her collarbone, catching the sunlight each time she turned. Her heels clicked sharply on the wooden floor, expensive, polished, and unkind. Her perfume, sweet, heavy, suffocating, drifted through the house and smothered the faint scent of the apple cobbler I had baked for David. She smiled wide, but her eyes, those eyes were colder than a December morning in Texas. And in that moment, I swear, something inside me whispered that her shine wouldn't last much longer. I greeted her gently as always, but her gaze slid across my small living room like she was inspecting something unworthy. Her attention lingered on my old curtains, the worn bookshelf, the aging family photos lining the wall, as if she were measuring how little I had and how much she had risen above. "Oh, Mother," she said sweetly, the word mother curving through the air like a blade wrapped in silk. "You must have forgotten. I come by every month with the money. Remember." Her smile was bright, her tone sweet enough to rot wood, but the lie sat between us like a living thing. I felt David's eyes on me, felt the pressure of his hope, felt the sting of Clara's smirk. "If you brought it," I whispered, "then it must have gotten lost somewhere." Her smile didn't falter, but her fingers tightened around her purse. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see it. A crack in her mask. The room went still. Even the wall clock paused between ticks. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud, angry, disbelieving. David looked between us, between my worn apron and Clara's elegant perfection, his brows knitting together with doubt. "Clara," he said slowly, "I transfer it to you every month. You've been giving it to her, right?" She tilted her head gently, pityingly, her voice soft like honey melting over ice. "Of course, darling. I come every month. Maybe your mother's memory." She let the sentence drift, a cruel implication hidden beneath the sweetness. "You know how it gets with age." Age. The word landed like a stone in my chest, not because it was true, but because of the way she used it as a weapon, not a fact. People had been treating me like a fading photograph ever since my husband died 10 years ago. But I knew my memory. I knew my truth. And I knew she had never brought me a single dollar. I didn't correct her. Not then. Not when she expected me to break. Some battles aren't meant to be fought immediately. Some must be watched and remembered. David placed a hand on my shoulder. Warm, gentle, so full of the affection I had raised him with. "Mom, it's probably just a misunderstanding. I'll check the accounts later. I want you to be comfortable." Comfortable. A word I hadn't felt in months. I nodded, not because I believed him, but because I refused to let my storm show on the surface. Instead, I poured David a glass of the orange juice I had squeezed fresh that morning. My hands were steady. My heart was not. Clara glided to his side, letting her manicured hand rest on his shoulder as if staking her claim. She looked at me with a kind of quiet disdain, the type of look people give when they think money buys goodness, integrity, even love. The air seemed to chill. My own living room felt felt foreign, like I had stepped into a place where truth hid in the shadows. Clara's gaze drifted to a framed photo on the shelf. David as a little boy, his blonde hair messy, cheeks rosy, eyes full of mischief. She exhaled dramatically. "You've kept the house so clean, Mother. Truly impressive, considering your age." A backhanded compliment wrapped in poison. I smiled gently. "Old, yes, but not too old to know who walks through my door. And who doesn't?" "Clara." The silence after that sentence was sharp enough to cut through her confidence. David shifted uneasily. "Mom, please, it's Mother's Day. Let's not argue. I just want you to be happy." "I do too," I said softly. Then I looked at Clara, really looked at her, letting my eyes tell the truth my mouth wasn't ready to speak. "But happiness doesn't come from what people claim they've done for you. It comes from what they actually do." David froze. Clara's smile thinned. The edges of her composure cracked. Minutes later, they left. David with a gentle promise, Clara with a stiff goodbye. The door clicked shut, leaving behind the faint smell of her perfume and the heavy echo of their lies. I sank into my old wooden chair, the room glowing with late afternoon sunlight. $40,000. 8 months. Money that could have fixed the leaking roof, replaced the broken heater, or simply given me comfort in the quiet years of my life. Instead, I had been counting coupons and thanking God for every can of peach slices from the church pantry. The ache in my chest wasn't anger. It was betrayal. Quiet, deep, unforgiving. That night, I reached for my old spiral notebook, the one where I once wrote grocery lists and prayers for my husband's health back when he was sick. But this time, I wrote something different. "Find out the truth." Underneath it, I added, "Don't trust gentle smiles. Don't trust fake tears." I closed the notebook slowly, not in fear, but in awakening. I wasn't weak. I had survived widowhood, debt, loneliness, quiet dinners at an empty table. I had survived grief, and I would survive this. David might have been blinded by love or by Clara's charm, but I wasn't. Not anymore. If she thought I was fragile, she had underestimated the wrong woman. The next morning, sunlight crept through the faded curtains of my kitchen, cutting across the floor in soft golden stripes. I sat with a cup of jasmine tea growing cold between my palms, staring at my small, worn phone on the table. Could I be wrong? The question gnawed at me like a quiet whisper I didn't want to hear. Maybe the bank made a mistake. Maybe Clara sent the money by mail and it got lost. Maybe in some moment of confusion I had forgotten. But deep down, the truth glimmered like a blade catching the light. I knew every dollar that entered this house. I knew every loaf of bread donated by the church. I knew every month I had clipped coupons from the newspaper like a woman fighting to stretch thin weeks into survivable ones. There had been no envelope, no letter, no money. I opened the old accounting ledger I had kept from my years volunteering as the treasurer for the women's group at Grace Fellowship Church. The pages were still straight, the handwriting neat. Every bill, every medication cost, every utility payment aligned like soldiers in rows. I skimmed through the pages, searching for any mention of the $5,000 my son believed he was sending me. Nothing. Not a single line. Not a single trace of a deposit. Just the truth, quiet, undeniable, and waiting to be acknowledged. I closed the ledger and let out a breath that felt like it had been lodged in my chest for months. No, I hadn't forgotten. She had simply never come. Later that morning, I walked to First Western Community Bank, the small brick building with green trim that I'd been going to for decades. The door chimed softly as I entered, and young Molly, the teller with kind eyes and nervous hands, smiled at me. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitford," she said gently. "What can I help you with today?" I handed her my passbook, trying to keep my voice steady. "Molly dear, please check if there were any transfers from my son, David Whitford. He says he's been sending me $5,000 every month." She blinked, surprised, but nodded quickly. "Of course, let me check." The tapping of her keyboard echoed in the quiet bank lobby. Tap, 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 then a pause, a long, heavy pause. She looked up, her face soft with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Whitford. I don't see any transfers for the last 8 months. Only a $1.20 interest deposit from January." The world went still. I nodded, thanked her, and left before my voice could break. Outside, the Texas morning wind cut across my face, carrying the smell of dust and pavement, the scent of old summers and harder years. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my purse, feeling the weight of something heavy settling in my chest. $40,000. Gone somewhere. Somewhere that wasn't here. I walked home slower than usual, each step like walking through thick air. Inside, the ticking of the wall clock, the very clock my late husband bought me for our 10th anniversary, filled the room with a soft, steady rhythm. Tick. The truth is coming. Talk. The truth is coming. By afternoon, I found myself back at Grace Fellowship. I had planned to help fold him sheets, but instead, I slid into the last pew and sat quietly. The stained glass windows threw colored patches of blue and red onto the floor, swirling like little pools of light. Reverend Matthews spotted me as he walked down the aisle after service. He stopped, his eyes warm with concern. "Helen, you look tired. Are you okay?" I smiled faintly. "I'm trying to understand why my my son's help never reached me. He sat beside me, hands folded. The Lord has a way of bringing truth to light, he said softly. Don't lose faith. I nodded, but inside something was shifting. Faith wasn't enough anymore. Faith needed movement. Faith needed action. That night at home, I opened the brown leather notebook David had gifted me for my 60th birthday. The one he said I should use to write the good things, the blessings, the joys. But this time, the first page wasn't a prayer. It was a promise. If they're lying, I will make the truth speak for itself. I pressed the pen so hard the ink bled through the page. Under the warm glow of my lamp, the words glowed like a vow etched into my soul. From that day forward, I began documenting everything. Every visit, every phone call, every strange smile. June 11th, Clara stopped by with a store-bought lemon loaf. Said, the money must be delayed. These banks are always mixing things up. No envelope, no explanation. July 6th, Clara visited wearing a new gold bracelet. Claimed she forgot the envelope in her other purse. No money, no receipt. July 29th, phone call. I'm at a charity meeting, Mother. I'll drop the money off next week. I heard loud music in the background. A restaurant, not a charity. I wrote everything down. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Numbers don't lie. Actions don't lie. And silence is often the loudest truth of all. Weeks passed and Clara kept showing up. Always perfectly dressed. Always carrying something decorative but empty. Flowers, cookies, scented candles that smelled like they cost more than my weekly groceries. But never the envelope. Never the truth. One hot August afternoon, I was trimming dead leaves off my sunflower patch when her white Mercedes rolled into the driveway. She stepped out, hair flawless, makeup immaculate, holding a bunch of lavender tied with twine. Mother, lavender helps with stress, she said, as if reading from a script. Stress isn't good for someone your age. I wiped my hands on my apron and met her eyes. My memory is just fine, Clara. Fine enough to remember the last time you brought money to me was never. Her smile faltered, just a fraction, but enough to see the truth beneath it. She regained her composure quickly, laughing too sweetly. Oh, Mother, you're mistaken. I've been sending it. The bank must be at fault. I nodded slowly, calm, controlled, letting her words hang in the humid air. I asked the bank, I said quietly. They said nothing has come through. For 8 months. The silence that followed was so sharp it carved itself into my memory. Even the sparrows on the fence stopped chirping. Clara clutched her necklace nervously. I'll double-check, she muttered, before hurrying back into her car. Her Mercedes sped down the road, leaving behind the scent of her expensive perfume and the lingering truth of her guilt. That evening, I wrote, August 18th, Clara lied again. Nervous, left early. Truth is tightening its circle around her. The words calmed me. This wasn't fear anymore. It was awakening. It was justice beginning to breathe through me. Over the next few weeks, I contacted David's bank, pretending to ask about family gift transfers. The representative couldn't tell me everything, but she hinted gently. If funds were transferred, they would have gone to an account with your name. If you didn't receive them, someone may have used a different account under your identity. A chill ran up my spine. A different account, using my name, forged behind my back. Clara could only be Clara. That night, I sat with my notebook open and reread every line I had written. The lamplight flickered over my handwriting, shaky but determined. Between the lines, I could almost hear my late husband's voice, strong, steady, guiding. Helen, he once told me, if someone underestimates you, don't shout. Let the truth speak for you. I closed the notebook, a slow calm washing over me. Tomorrow, the truth would begin to rise. The next morning, I walked back to the church with a manila envelope filled with copies of my notes. Every date, every lie, every missing dollar. I handed it to Reverend Matthews. Pastor, I said softly, if anything happens to me, keep this safe. He frowned, concern clouding his eyes. Helen, what are you planning? I smiled, not with fear but with certainty. I'm preparing for the truth to be heard. As I stepped out of the church doors, I felt lighter. Lighter than I had in months, maybe in years. I knew the road ahead would hurt, would test me, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had been underestimated long enough. That evening, as the Texas sun slipped behind the oak trees, painting the sky shades of orange and red, I sat on my porch and whispered to the wind, Clara, you chose the wrong woman to deceive. Then I opened my notebook one last time for the night and wrote, the first step toward justice is memory. And in the fading light, I knew my fight had only just begun. The next morning arrived wrapped in a dull gray sky, the kind that makes you feel as if the world is holding its breath. I moved slowly through my kitchen, still clutching my mug of lukewarm tea as if it could anchor me to sanity. My hands trembled just enough for me to feel it, just enough to remind me that, despite everything, I was still standing. But inside me, something else trembled too. Something stronger, something rising. As the tea steamed faintly against the window pane, I knew I couldn't keep moving like a ghost in my own home. I had spent 8 long months surviving on scraps of kindness, stretching pennies until they screamed, praying for strength in the quiet hours no one else saw. But now, the truth was pushing from beneath the surface, demanding to be seen. seen, and I was ready to see it, ready to face it. I walked into my small living room where the morning light fell softly across the collection of family frames lining the mantel. Photos of my younger self with David in my arms, his tiny fingers gripping my necklace as if holding the whole world. Photos of my late husband, tall and steady, with the warmth in his smile that made everything seem possible. For a moment, I traced my thumb over the glass of one frame. David at 6 years old, missing a front tooth, clutching a paper airplane. In his little boy handwriting on the back, he had written, "For Mom, I'll always take care of you." The memory pierced through me with the sharpness of a truth I had forgotten. David was not the enemy. He was the child I raised, kind, thoughtful, trusting. Too trusting. The betrayal wasn't his. It never was. The betrayal had walked into my home wearing perfume and pearls, and one day soon that betrayal would be exposed. I inhaled deeply, letting steady resolve replace fear. Then I opened my notebook again, my lifeline, my witness. September 3rd, Clara called. Said she was too overwhelmed to stop by. Background noise sounded like airport chatter. Still no money. September 8th, David texted me, "Mom, hope the money helps. We'll visit soon." My heart cracked. He believed Clara. He had no idea. September 12th, Clara brought tulips. Claimed the monthly transfer. Went through on the 10th. I smiled and wrote it down. Every lie has a date, time, a thread to pull. The entries felt like stones lining a path I couldn't turn away from. Each one clearer, sharper, heavier. I stared at the words until they blurred slightly, not from confusion, but from clarity so intense it brought tears to my eyes. I wasn't documenting lies anymore. I was documenting the beginning of justice. Later that evening, the sky bruised into purple as I sat on the porch, letting the cool air settle over me. Crickets hummed from somewhere in the yard, and for a brief moment, the world felt almost peaceful. Almost. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the voicemail Clara left earlier. "Mother, I'll try to come by tomorrow. I've been busy. Don't make a fuss about the money. It's always handled. You know that." Handled. Such a careful word. Such a polished lie. I deleted the message and let the silence fill the space she once tried to control. Tomorrow would not be another day of pretending. Tomorrow would be a day when pieces moved. Quietly. Intentionally. Finally, as the first stars appeared in the night, I sat back and allowed a thought, small but fierce, to pulse through me. She thinks I'm fragile. She thinks I'm slow. She thinks old age means blindness. But I had survived too much in my life to break over this. And if Clara believed she could keep burying the truth, she had forgotten one thing. I had already begun to dig. In the stillness, I whispered into the darkness. Not for Clara, not even for myself, but for the woman I once was before lies tried to shrink my world. The truth is coming. My voice was quiet, but the night heard it. The earth heard it. And somewhere deep inside me, a storm that had gathered for months finally formed its eye. Calm, focused, unstoppable. I closed my notebook gently, as if sealing a chapter one would never revisit the same way again. Then I rose from the porch, the boards creaking under my feet like an old friend waking up. The wind brushed against my cheek, carrying the scent of lavender from the garden. A small reminder that even in bitter seasons, something survives. Something blooms. Even the smallest flower finds a way to rise. And so would I. I stepped inside my home, turned the lock softly, and stood for a moment in the middle of my living room. The lamp beside the sofa glowed warm and golden, catching the dust motes drifting in the air like tiny sparks of hope. This house had seen laughter, loss, birthdays, storms, prayers. It had seen me break, and now it would see me fight, because the truth wasn't just something I wanted. It was something I needed, something I had earned, something that belonged to me and to no one else. I walked to my bedroom door, placed the notebook on my nightstand, and whispered a final promise into the quiet space. This ends with me. Then I switched off the lamp, letting the darkness settle gently, not as something to fear, but as something I would rise through. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning, one Clara would never see coming. And in that final steady moment before sleep took me, I knew with complete certainty my fight for justice had already started, and the truth was on its way home. That morning, the Texas air felt heavier than usual, like the sky was pressing down on the earth. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and the jasmine vine I planted behind the porch the year David left for college. I was trimming my lavender bushes, letting the routine calm my thoughts, when I heard it, the smooth, polished hum of an expensive engine rolling closer. My heart tightened before my mind even caught up. We don't get many visitors on my quiet street, and none of them drive cars that purr like that. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway snapped the morning's peace in half. I stood up slowly, shading my eyes against the sun. A glossy white BMW eased to a stop at the gate, its chrome details flashing like teeth in the light. It was the kind of car that didn't just arrive. It announced itself. The door opened and there she was, Clara. Every strand of hair perfectly curled, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, lips the color of ripe cherries. Today she wore a pale beige wrap dress, a delicate gold necklace, and heels so high they looked dangerous. In her right hand, she held a large gift basket wrapped in transparent cellophane and tied tied with a thick crimson ribbon, assorted cookies, imported tea, little jars of jam, all carefully arranged to look generous. It was beautiful, but it felt hollow from the moment I saw it. "Mother," she called out, her voice warm, sweet, and layered with something sharp underneath. "I brought you a little something. David's stuck in meetings all morning, so I came in his place." I wiped my hands on my apron and watched her walk up the porch steps, each heel tap deliberate and practiced. "How thoughtful," I said softly, refusing to offer a smile I didn't feel. "You two must be very busy." Her gaze drifted lazily across the yard, the lavender bushes, the worn wooden bench, the potted herbs lined in mismatched containers. "Oh my," she sighed theatrically, "your garden is still as beautiful as ever. I don't know how you manage it all by yourself." I slipped my gardening shears into the soil at my feet. "With these hands and a little patience," I replied. Hands that had raised a boy, hands that had buried a husband, hands that were not as weak as she liked to pretend. She placed the gift basket on the small patio table beside the porch chair. Up close, I could see the fancy labels: imported cookies, artisan crackers, a small bottle of white wine, a jar of blood orange marmalade. Pretty, pricey, emotionally empty. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea from the pitcher I brought out earlier and sat down. The chair creaked familiarly as I leaned back, watching her. When she finally sat across from me, I met her eyes. "Clara," I said quietly, "let me ask you something." Suspicion sat in the air between us, waiting. She smiled over the rim of her glass, not drinking, just posing. "Of course, Mother. What is it?" The mother always sounded a little too polished on her tongue, a title with no weight behind it. I held her gaze, refusing to be the one who flinched. "Where is this month's money? The 5,000 you said you'd bring over." My words were calm. My heart was not. For a split second, her smile froze, barely there, like a glitch in a perfect picture. Then she laughed, high and glassy, the sound of something fragile tapping against something harder. "Oh, Mother, I must have left it in the car," she said lightly. "I'm so silly sometimes." Her voice went up half a pitch. Her fingers traced the edge of the iced tea glass, never lifting it to her lips. She couldn't even pretend ease convincingly. I turned my head slightly, looking past her to the driveway where the BMW gleamed beneath a mid-morning sun. The reflection off the hood highlighted every impeccable curve. New paint, temporary place, a car that looked every inch like a recent indulgent purchase. I let a slow smile curve at the edge of my mouth. "Nice car, Clara," I murmured. "Must have cost quite a bit." She shrugged too quickly. Her laugh came out stiff. "Oh, not really, Mother. I just upgraded for convenience. You know how it is. My boutique work requires a professional image." "A professional image? How convenient." "Of course," I answered softly. "A new car for work, and the envelopes that always seem to be left in the car. How odd that they never quite arrive at my table." The words landed between us like a stone dropped in still water. Her face tightened for half a heartbeat before she smoothed it over again. "You don't trust me anymore," she said, voice suddenly wounded. "Next time I'll bring the bank receipt if that makes you feel better." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Sometimes silence tells the truth louder than accusations. We sat there in the thickening heat as the porch fan whirred overhead. The cicadas in the yard droned like a restless hum, filling the gaps in our conversation. Every passing second felt like a strand pulled from a tangled rope. Clara stood abruptly, glancing down at her watch as if remembering an urgent engagement. "I have to run," she said briskly. "I've got a client meeting. But don't worry, I'll remind David to resend the money through the bank. I'm sure this is just a small mix-up." I nodded slowly. "All right, go on then. And Clara," she paused, one hand on the railing, "don't forget the envelope in your car this time." She turned back just enough for me to see the faint irritation in her eyes. The corner of her mouth twitched into a thin smile. "You're very sharp, Mother," she said. Then she clicked away, heels beating out a cold, steady rhythm on the wooden steps. The car door shut with a solid thud. The engine sprang to life. The BMW rolled down the driveway, leaving behind a streak of sunlight and the bitter smell of her perfume. When the sound of the engine faded, the silence rushed back in like a tide. I sat down slowly, my fingers interlaced on the table, the weight pressing against my chest, no longer confusion but confirmation. I no longer had doubts. I knew. I rose and walked back into the house. Each step across the wooden floor echoed in my mind like a heartbeat that refused to quiet. Sometimes the moment you stop questioning is the moment you start fighting. Inside, the house felt cooler, dimmer, as if it had drawn in breath and was waiting with me. I went straight to the small cabinet by the hallway, slid open the drawer, and pulled out my brown leather notebook, the one that had turned from a place for recipes and prayers into something sharper, something like a record. I sat at the dining table, pen in hand, and let the words spill out steady and precise. September 10th, Clara came alone, brought a gift basket, claimed she left the money in the car, arrived in a brand new BMW, temporary place. Hands were trembling, voice too high, avoided eye contact. I set the pen down and exhaled. My hands shook just a little, but my resolve did not. I stared at the page, at the the ink still drying. I'd spent a lifetime working with numbers, balancing small business accounts, managing budgets with barely enough to stretch. Numbers don't lie. People do. That afternoon, I left the house with my purse and notebook tucked under my arm and walked down to the small post office at the corner. Not the big bank branch downtown, not my home phone, not my own computer. I didn't want anything traced back too neatly, not when I suspected eyes watching. Inside the post office in the back corridor, there was still an old public phone bolted to the wall, the stubborn kind that refused to vanish even in a world full of smartphones. I picked up the receiver, fed in a few coins, and dialed David's company number from memory. "Good morning, Whitford Dynamics," a young receptionist chirped. "How may I direct your call?" I kept my tone polite and even. "This is Helen Whitford, David's mother. I'd like to speak with someone in accounting, please. It's a personal matter." After a brief hold and a crackle of static, another voice came on, more mature, measured. "This is Susan Parker in accounting. How can I help you, Mrs. Whitford?" I gripped the receiver tighter. "Thank you, Miss Parker. I just need to confirm something small. My son tells me he's been sending $5,000 each month for the past several months as support. I'd like to know if those deductions are actually being made." She hesitated, and I could almost picture her glancing around before lowering her voice. "Mrs. Whitford, I can't share detailed personal account information, but let me see what I can say in general terms. Hold one moment." The seconds stretched. My heart thudded in my ears. The metal of the receiver felt cold against my palm. When her voice returned, it had shifted from casual to careful. "I do see automated transfers going out every month from Mr. Whitford's personal account," she said slowly. "Same day, same amount, $5,000. But the receiving account details I can't disclose in full. I can say the account name matches yours. The number, however, is not one I've ever seen associated with your existing client information." A chill slid down my spine, settling deep. "To whom?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "If it isn't mine, then to whom?" "I'm not certain," Susan said gently. "I assumed it was you given the name. But if you're saying you didn't receive those funds, then someone may have set up an account under your identity." There it was, the truth, cold and clean. I swallowed, forcing my voice not to shake. "Thank you, Susan. That's all I needed for now." I hung up the phone and stood in the narrow hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. My heart raced, but my mind felt utterly clear, like a sky swept bare after a storm. A fake account. In my name. Someone had taken not just my money, but my identity. And in my world, only one person had the motive, the access, and the arrogance to do that. Clara. On the walk home, the sun felt harsher, the road longer. My shadow stretched out in front of me, thin and stubborn. The dry wind carried the smell of baked earth and distant asphalt, reminding me of summers when my father would say, "If you want to know who's honest, look at their hands, not their words." Honest hands were worn, marked with work. Clara's hands were soft, manicured, every nail painted spotless. Hands that never lifted anything heavier than a shopping bag. By the time I reached my porch, I knew one thing for certain. I was done doubting. I was done waiting. Tomorrow would not be another quiet day. Tomorrow the truth would start moving. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I made myself a cup of peppermint tea and sat at the kitchen table under the warm yellow glow of the overhead light. The tea cooled untouched as the cicadas' chorus outside faded slowly into the deeper sounds of night. The whole house seemed to hold its breath with me. I opened my brown leather notebook to a fresh page. The pen felt heavier than usual between my fingers, but once I started writing, the words flowed with a clarity that surprised even me. September 10th, evening. Clara visited. Elegant as always. New car, same lies. Called David's company. Confirmed. Transfers are being sent, but not to my account. Someone opened another account under my name. I set the pen down and stared at the lines until they blurred slightly. Not from confusion, from the sharpness of seeing the full picture. This wasn't just carelessness. It wasn't just greed. It was a deliberate betrayal wrapped in my name. I closed the notebook and looked at my reflection in the dark window. A silver-haired woman stared back at me, small perhaps, but with eyes still bright and unbroken. Lines around my mouth from years of laughter and worry. Hands that had known love and loss. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. I turned off the kitchen light and stepped out onto the porch. The night breeze brushed past me, carrying the scent of jasmine and damp wood. In the corner of the yard, moonlight bathed the old wooden bench where my husband and I used to sit and talk about nothing and everything. I walked over and placed my hand on the worn armrest, feeling the grooves his fingers had left over the years. "Mark," I whispered into the darkness, "if you were still here, you'd tell me to do what's right, wouldn't you?" The wind rustled the leaves above me in a soft, restless murmur. I took it as an answer, as permission. When I went back inside, I stood in front of the mirror by my bedroom door. The woman looking back at me no longer seemed tired, no longer looked like someone waiting to be rescued. She looked like someone who was done being underestimated, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that with sunrise, Clara's carefully built world would start to crack. Morning would not just bring light, it would bring movement. My movement. The next morning, I was cutting lavender stems to hang and dry above the kitchen window when a sudden knock echoed through the house. Not the quick, nervous knock of a neighbor, not the light tap of a delivery person. This knock was firm, steady, deliberate. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood on my porch, his hair threaded with gray, his expression serious but kind. His tie was slightly loosened, his leather briefcase worn at the edges, the kind of wear that comes from use, not show. "Mrs. Whitford?" he asked with a polite nod. "I'm Daniel Lawson, chief accountant at your son's firm." I narrowed my eyes slightly, not out of distrust, but out of habit now. "I only spoke with a woman from accounting yesterday," I said slowly. "Susan." He nodded. "Susan is my deputy. She told me about your call. I thought it was important to speak with you in person, if you're willing." Something in his tone, honest, almost apologetic, made me step aside. "Come in," I said. "I'll get you some water." Morning light streamed through the kitchen window, catching the lines on his face as he sat at the table. They weren't the lines of someone careless. They were the lines of someone who had seen more numbers and more secrets than most. He placed his briefcase on the table, unlatched it, and pulled out a thick folder neatly clipped. Rows of printed text, dates, amounts, account names, familiar language to a woman who had spent decades keeping books for small businesses that couldn't survive a single missing dollar. He slid the folder toward me. "These," he said quietly, "are copies of the transfers your son has been making. 8 months, $5,000 each, $40,000 in total." My fingers trembled as I reached for the first page. There it was in black ink. Sender David Whitford. Amount $5,000. Recipient account name Helen Marie Whitford. Account number one I had never seen in my life. I swallowed hard. "Who opened this account?" I asked. My voice barely made it out. Daniel sighed, removing his glasses to clean them with a small cloth. "Your daughter-in-law," he said at last. "Clara Whitford. Every document for that sub-account bears her signature, and an authorization form David signed, likely without reading it. She attached a copy of your ID to validate it. I suspect the ID was forged." The room spun just a little. I steadied myself by gripping the edge of the table. 8 months, $40,000. Stolen from my son through a bank account wearing my name like a mask. "And David," I whispered, "he doesn't know?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. He's a kind man, a bit trusting. He lets Clara handle the paperwork. Most of our client-facing documents go through her. We only noticed irregularities when we saw how the funds were being withdrawn." I looked up sharply. "How were they being used?" He flipped to another set of papers. "Company credit card misuse," he said. "First-class flights, high-end spa visits, jewelry purchases, designer clothing, a down payment on a luxury car lease, personal expenses charged as client entertainment and then covered indirectly by that account. It's bad, Mrs. Whitford." The words hit like stones. Spa, flights, car. While I had been stretching donated food and counting coins, she had been bathing in stolen comfort. I turned to the window, eyes falling on the bench where Clara once sat sipping tea and telling me, "David is so busy, Mother. I handle everything for him. Everything, including his trust, including my dignity." I drew a slow breath, turned back to Daniel, and met his steady gray eyes. "Mr. Lawson," I said, my voice rough but resolute, "if I want to expose this, not just for me but for my son, will you help me?" He studied me for a moment as if weighing the cost of honesty. Then he nodded. "I believe in justice, Mrs. Whitford," he said, "but I also believe in evidence. We'll need to prepare carefully. Clara will fight back. She'll twist stories, make herself the victim. We have to be ready for that." A flicker of something like gratitude warmed my chest. I wasn't alone anymore. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Time," he answered. "I'll pull all transaction histories, related documents, internal records. I'll coordinate with a legal contact I trust. We'll make sure that when the truth surfaces, it can't be buried again." For the first time in months, the heaviness in my chest loosened just a little. Not because justice had been done yet, but because it had finally taken its first breath. When he left, the door clicked softly behind him. The house grew quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet. This quiet felt armed. Sometimes the most powerful thing isn't a shout. It's a mother who has decided she will not be silenced. 3 days passed, and each one felt like it was stretched longer than the last. But for the first time in months, those days weren't filled with helplessness. They were filled with preparation. Daniel called twice, each time to clarify small details. Dates, statements, internal memos. Every question was another thread pulling Clara's web apart. That afternoon, as the sun slid lower over the rooftops, I sat at the table with my notebook open. The house hummed softly with a fridge and the ticking clock, and I wrote with a steady hand. September 11th, Daniel came. Brought records. 8 transfers, $5,000 each, to an account opened under my name but controlled by Clara. Company card used for personal luxuries. It wasn't just my money. It was David's too. I have an alibi I now? The fight begins. I read the last line twice. The fight begins. It felt strange and strangely good to see those words beside my neat handwriting. Outside, the evening sky burned red, streaks of orange and crimson slashing across the clouds. I stood at the window, watching the light shift, and spoke aloud into the empty room. Clara, I murmured, you forgot I worked with numbers for 40 years. You forgot numbers don't bend to lies. This time, the numbers will speak for me. Saying it out loud made my chest feel easier, like some invisible rope had loosened a notch. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in a long time. The crickets outside sang their steady chorus, but instead of sounding lonely, they sounded like a slow count towards something. A countdown. When I woke, I knew what the next step had to be. I couldn't just unveil this in a random moment. There needed to be a place, time, a setting where lies couldn't easily slither away. So I picked up the phone and dialed David. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm but tired. Hey Mom, sorry I haven't called. Things have been crazy. I smiled into the receiver, keeping my tone light. It's all right, sweetheart. I know you're busy. I was just thinking, it's been a while since we had a proper dinner together. You and Clara. How about Sunday? I'll make that beef stew you love. We can invite Reverend Matthews too. Talk about that small charity idea I mentioned. There was a pause, then a spark of genuine excitement in his voice. That sounds great. Really, Clara will be thrilled. What time? 7, I said gently. Don't be late. I'll be waiting. When I hung up, my hands shook just a little. Not with fear, with adrenaline, with purpose. I walked to the living room, picked up my notebook and wrote, September 12th, call David. Invited him and Clara for dinner Sunday. Beef stew, candlelight, one pastor, one file, one truth. Not a trap for my son, a mirror for his wife. I underlined mirror once. Clara loved mirrors. She was about to see the clearest one of her life. Tell me honestly, if you were in my place, would you set the table for truth like this? Or would you let the lie go on just to keep the peace? Sometimes peace is just silence sitting on top of a wound. Sunday arrived wrapped in the kind of golden evening light that makes everything look softer than it is. I worked in the kitchen from afternoon onward, not because I needed that long, but because I needed the movement. Chopping, stirring, tasting. It all helped keep my nerves from buzzing out of control. The pot of red wine beef stew simmered slowly on the stove, filling the house with a scent of herbs, onions, and meat. It was David's favorite dish since he was small. Every birthday, every special occasion, he'd ask for it. Mom, yours is better than any restaurant, he'd say with that wide boyish grin. Tonight it wasn't just food. It was memory, a reminder, a bridge between the boy he was and the man he'd become. I laid a crisp white tablecloth on the dining table, smoothing out the creases. Then I set out my best porcelain dishes, the ones Mark and I received as a wedding gift. 3 wine glasses, for plates, silverware polished until it caught the light. In the center, I placed a beige envelope, neat, unmarked. Inside it, a condensed set of copies Daniel had dropped off earlier. The essentials, 8 transfers, account details, key credit card statements, evidence disguised as something ordinary. At 7 sharp, I heard the car door outside. Through the curtain, I saw David's sedan and behind it, Clara's white BMW. My chest tightened, then loosened. Showtime. David walked in first, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Mom, it smells amazing in here, he said, pulling me into a hug. You look great. I smiled and rested my hand on his cheek. I'm better than ever, thanks to God's grace, and to the two of you. Clara stepped in behind him, wrapped in a pale lavender dress that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She smiled, that polished, practiced smile she wore at every social event. Oh, how cozy, she said. You always make dinner feel so special, Mother. Yes, I replied softly. Tonight will be very special. About 15 minutes later, there was another knock. Reverend Matthews arrived with a large white envelope in his hands. He smiled apologetically. Sorry I'm a bit late, Helen. Here are the preliminary papers for that senior aid fund you were asking about, he said, handing it to me. Thank you, Pastor, I said, taking it and calmly slipping it beside the beige envelope on the table. Clara's eyes flit toward them, curious. Oh, she said with a sweet tilt of her head. So this really is the charity dinner. I thought you were joking. I poured wine for Clara and David, sweet iced tea for the Reverend, and took a small splash of wine for myself. We talked about small things at first, the garden, church events, the heat, the new couple that had moved in down the street. If anyone had walked in just then, they would have seen nothing but an ordinary family dinner. Laughter, light, clinking glasses, but beneath the table, the tension coiled like a hidden wire. When the stew was served and everyone's plates were full, I waited for a moment of quiet. Then I looked at David with a small smile. I truly appreciate you both, I said softly, especially for this month's 5,000. It's helped me so much. Clara paused for a heartbeat, then lifted her wine glass and smiled. Oh, Mother, please don't be so formal. I'm just doing what I should. You know that. I nodded, lowering my eyes in what I let them think was shyness. I'm thrilled, I continued. I even bought a little portable heater. Nights get chilly and it makes me feel safe. Clara's smile broadened, smug and satisfied. She tilted her head toward David, silently telling him, "See, everything is fine." I watched her carefully, then let my voice turn just a shade lighter. "Oh, Clara, I'm just curious," I said. "What day do you usually send it?" She did embrace. She wasn't expecting that specific thread to be pulled. She answered instantly. "The 10th of every month, Mother," she replied. Her tone was almost bored. I nodded lightly, but before I could answer, David frowned. "Wait," he said slowly. "Not the 10th, honey. I said the auto transfer for the 15th. I remember because that's the day payroll hits." The room went still. Do you know that silence when a liar walks straight into their own trap? You can almost hear the moment their confidence shatters. If it were you sitting at that table, would you have spoken up right then? Or would you have done what I did and let the silence speak for itself? For a moment, all I heard was the faint clink of cutlery on porcelain. Clara blinked once, twice, then forced a small laugh. "Really? I thought you chose the 10th," she muttered, her voice a touch too tight around the edges. David's frown deepened. "No, I'm certain," he said. "I even remember telling you the 15th because it matches the company's cycle. We talked about it in the kitchen, remember?" Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. "Well, maybe I remembered wrong," she said lightly. "You know how busy things have been. All the dates start to blur." I smiled gently and set my fork down. "Oh, wonderful," I said calmly. "I'll go to the bank on the 15th and check, just to make sure the system isn't having issues. I'd hate for any transfer to be misdirected." Clara gave a brittle laugh, eyes darting quickly to the envelopes on the table and back. "Mother, you're so careful," she replied, trying to sound playful. "Don't worry, I've been sending it regularly." David nodded slowly, but his eyes had changed. There was a small new line of doubt there now, a crack in the blind trust he'd worn like armor. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but Clara quickly launched into a story about a client at her boutique, dragging the conversation toward neutral ground. She smiled widely, the performance polished, but the air in the room had shifted. Once suspicion enters, it doesn't leave quietly. I stayed mostly quiet for the rest of dinner, listening, watching, committing every flicker of expression to memory. After the main course, I brought out an apple cobbler, cinnamon drifting through the room in warm clouds. David praised it with that nostalgic smile I'd missed. Clara barely ate, glancing at her watch more than at her plate. When they finally stood to leave, I walked them to the door. "Thank you both for coming," I said softly. "I haven't laughed this much in a long time." David kissed my cheek. "We should do this more often," he said. "I'll call you soon." I nodded. Then I turned to Clara. "Remember," I said gently, "I'll go to the bank on the 15th, just to be sure the system isn't acting up." Her smile stiffened. "Yes, Mother. I'm sure there won't be any problem." When their cars pulled away and disappeared into the night, I closed the door quietly and leaned my back against it. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was release, the kind that comes when you stop doubting your own eyes. I went to the small desk off the kitchen and turned on the computer. The glow from the screen lit a framed photo beside it. Mark, David, and me at some long ago picnic, all sunburned and smiling. Mark's eyes seemed to nudge me forward. I opened my email and began typing. Subject: "It's time to begin." "Daniel, I confirmed tonight that Clara is lying directly to both of us." They contradicted each other about the transfer dates at my table. David still believes her, but not as blindly as before. "Please proceed with gathering everything. Full statements, internal records, confirmation letters from the bank. Laura, I know Daniel has spoken with you. Once we have the documents, I want to move forward carefully. I don't want to destroy my son's life. I just want him to see the truth with his own eyes and protect what's his. By the 15th, I want everything lined up. It's time for her to unravel herself. Helen." I reread the message once, then hit send. The click felt small but final. A line drawn. Outside, the night breeze moved the curtains just a little, carrying in the scent of jasmine and damp earth. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second counting down toward the 15th. 2 days later, Daniel replied. "Simple, precise. I obtained confirmation from the bank. The account using your name was opened by Clara with forged documents. The bank will release data with a subpoena. Laura is ready when you are. Everything is moving in the right direction." It was the sound of an old iron gate creaking open. The path ahead was no longer blocked. It was just hard. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "September 13th dinner went as planned." Clara exposed herself without knowing it. David's faith shook. 15th bank check. Justice is coming. Soft as a breeze. Then I closed the notebook, blew out the small candle on my desk, and looked at my reflection in the dark window. "Mark," I whispered, "do you see? She thinks she's clever." But her own tongue tightened the knot. All I have to do now is stand still and let the rope pull. The trap was set. The prey was walking in. The morning of the 15th dawned with a sky so clear it almost hurt my eyes. I sat by the window with a cup of jasmine tea, strangely calm. Today was the day Daniel had promised to send everything. In just a few hours, every lie would have a shade black ink on white paper. Around 8 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mrs. Whitford," he said, his voice steady and low. below. It's all done. I've sent you a full packet: statements, cross-references, confirmation memos. Laura has reviewed everything. With your signature and journal, we can open a legal case whenever you're ready. Thank you, I managed. I never imagined I'd need an accountant and a lawyer to protect the money my own son meant for me. You're not alone, he replied quietly. This happens more often than you'd think. Sometimes the cruelest fraud wears a familiar face. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. The mail carrier handed me a large sealed manila envelope stamped "Confidential, Whitford Financial Records." I held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I set it on the table and slowly peeled it open. Inside were dozens of clean printouts, 8 transfers, $5,000 each, $40,000 in total. Sender: David Whitford. Recipient: Clara. Controlled subaccount in the name of Helen M. Whitford. Official bank paper. Official betrayal. I read them twice and still felt disbelief, as if the numbers were laughing at the faith I had placed in her smile. At the bottom of one page, Daniel had handwritten a note in blue ink. Clara used this account as her personal fund. Additional spending traced through related cards include spa services, travel, and the lease of a new BMW. Total: $47,800 over 8 months. $47,800. The price tag of trust. The morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, laying pale gold bars across the table and over the documents. The color looked almost holy, but what it lit was rotten. I turned to the next sheet. A spa receipt in Houston for $1,200. A weekend business trip to Miami, flights and hotel, $3,400. A dealership invoice, $15,000 down on a luxury BMW lease. Each piece of paper was a small, precise knife, and each knife carried my name. I sat very still, breathing deeply, letting the first wave of hurt pass through me without breaking me open. I remember Clara striding into my home with gift baskets and flowers, saying, "Mother, I care for you like my own." Now I understood what she meant. She cared for my name, enough to wear it like a mask while she drained the accounts underneath it. I reached for my notebook, my justice journal now, and wrote, September 17th, received Daniel's records today. 8 transfers, $40,000, none to me. Spa visits, travel, new car, total $47,800. Money taken in my name, trust stolen in my son's name. The cost of believing someone's smile. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the realization that I was standing at the edge of getting my dignity back. That afternoon, Laura called. Her voice was firm, professional, with a layer of compassion beneath. "Helen, I've reviewed everything Daniel sent," she said. "This is a textbook case of elder financial exploitation and marital fraud. We could file criminal charges, civil charges, or both. The law is on your side." I stared at the documents spread across my table. "I don't want to run to court before David sees this with his own eyes," I said quietly. "If we go straight to a judge, it will feel like I chose the law over my own son. I need him to witness first. Need him to understand I didn't dream this up." Laura was silent for a moment. "You're right," she said finally. "Nothing shatters denial like seeing hard evidence laid out in front of you. What do you have in mind?" I looked toward the church bulletin on my fridge. An idea had been forming for days. Now it landed with certainty. "I want Reverend Matthews to help me host a small charity planning dinner," I said. "Just the 4 of us. And I want that envelope of donation documents to sit right in the middle of the table." Laura gave a small, knowing laugh. "A staged night to unveil the truth. Very measured, Helen. I'll ask Daniel to condense the key pages into something clear but undeniable." That evening, I spread all the papers across the dining table. Statements, receipts, internal notes, signed forms. With a red pen, I marked the crucial withdrawals, the forged authorization, the matching dates. Then I slid the most important pages into a thick beige envelope. On the front, in steady block letters, I wrote, "Donation documents, Senior Support Fund." Only I knew there wasn't a single donation form inside. Only truth and guilt. I sat staring at the envelope for a long time. My pulse beat steadily in my throat. For so long, I had thought of myself as just an aging widow trying to get by. Someone people felt free to talk over, to manage, to handle. Looking at that envelope, I realized something else. I had never been weak. I had been convincing myself I was. Around 8 that night, the phone rang again. "Daniel, Mrs. Whitford," he said. "Laura is ready to file whenever you give the word. Waiting until after your dinner is wise. One thing I've learned, Clara will eventually expose herself fully. People like her always do." I smiled, a small, real smile this time. "I know," I replied. "Thank you, Daniel. You've done more than your job. You've given me back my belief in justice." After hanging up, I locked the full file in the cabinet beneath a drawer that held my family photos. On top of the folder, I placed a small note. Evidence of fraud. Evidence of a mother who refused to stay silent. When I closed the drawer and turned the key, the tiny click sounded like a promise being sealed. That night in my journal I wrote, "Daniel gathered statements, receipts, car papers. Clara's spending trail trace like a trail of gold dust she thought no one would follow. Laura confirmed, we have enough for an exploitation case, but the court will wait. First, my son must see her truth for himself. The envelope will sit in the center of the table. My hands shake, not with fear, but because I am finally about to reclaim my dignity. Have you ever stood right before a storm you chose to walk into, knowing it would break something but fix something deeper? The preliminary hearing came sooner than I expected. After the charity dinner of truth, after the envelope was opened under the quiet gaze of Reverend Matthews and the stunned silence of my son, after Clara's tears turned from sweet manipulation to cornered panic, there was no going back. David had seen everything. His hands had trembled as he flipped through the pages. His face had drained of color when he realized that the person stealing from me had been stealing from him too. There were arguments. There were nights he didn't call. There were meetings with Laura and Daniel, decisions I never thought I'd be making at my age. And then one gray morning, a notice arrived. Case number 24-301. Helen M. Whitford versus Clara and Whitford. Elder financial exploitation. Marital financial fraud. I ran my fingers over the blue court stamp. Justice was close now. Strange thing is, when justice gets close, it doesn't feel like victory. Feels heavy. The morning of the hearing, the sky was a slate gray, the clouds low and waiting. The wind bit sharper than usual, slipping under my coat as I stood on the courthouse steps with Laura by my side. You holding up? She asked, adjusting the files in her arms. I am, I said. I just wish it didn't have to come to this. I never imagined I'd see my family's name on a court docket. Inside, the hallway was long and glossy, smelling faintly of paper, coffee, and nerves. I felt small walking beside the tall walls and heavy doors, but for the first time, small didn't mean powerless. When we entered the courtroom, Clara was already there. She sat at the defendant's table in a fitted black suit, hair pulled back in a sleek bun, makeup paler than usual. Beside her, a young attorney shuffled through papers, trying to look composed. She turned her head and saw me, offering a faint, shaky smile. A smile that used to fool me. Now it only made my stomach tighten. Behind her, in the gallery, sat David. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me at first. His eyes were hollow, sunken with too many sleepless nights. I wanted to reach out, but there are places a mother's hand can't go for her child. Some steps they have to walk alone. The judge entered, his robe swaying, and the gavel's sharp knock echoed through the room. Court is now in session in the matter of Whitford versus Whitford, he announced. Allegations: elder financial exploitation and marital financial fraud. Laura stood first, her voice clear and even, the sound of controlled fire. Your Honor, for 8 consecutive months, the defendant, Mrs. Clara Whitford, used a fraudulent bank subaccount opened under her mother-in-law's name to misappropriate a total of $40,000. Additionally, she made personal charges on a company-related card, including luxury travel, spa services, and a car lease, funneling benefits indirectly from funds intended for the plaintiff. The room went quiet except for the rustle of her placing documents before the judge. Bank statements, receipts, signed forms, my journal. The plaintiff, Laura continued, a 67-year-old widow, survived on church aid while funds meant for her support were diverted. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, organized pattern of deceit. Clara's attorney sprang up. Your Honor, he said quickly, my client maintains this was a miscommunication in household financial management. Mrs. Whitford is elderly and may have misremembered receiving the transfers. My client brought her money many times. I felt my blood rise, hot and sharp. Clara lowered her head, then looked up with practiced fragility, her voice trembling. Your Honor, she said, my mother-in-law's memory hasn't been the same. I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was just helping David manage things. Maybe she forgot some of the visits. The knife of those words dug deep, not into my memory, into my dignity. But before I could be swallowed by anger, Laura placed a steady hand on my arm. Then she stepped forward, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Your Honor, she said, Mrs. Whitford's memory is sharp enough to have documented in detail every visit, every excuse, every missing envelope. And here is the journal to prove it. She held up my brown leather notebook. In that moment, it looked heavier than any briefcase in the room. In this, she continued, you will find 8 months of entries, dates, times, exact phrases spoken by the defendant. I left it in the car. The bank must be delayed. You know how age affects memory. Every line matches the transaction dates. If this is what we call memory loss, then it's the most accurate kind I've ever seen. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge flipped through several pages, his brow furrowing. Then he turned to Daniel, who had been called as an expert witness. Mr. Lawson, the judge said, do you confirm the authenticity of these records? Daniel stood, straightened his tie, and spoke clearly. Yes, Your Honor. I am the chief accountant at Whitford Dynamics. I confirm the statements and reconciliations are accurate. Each transfer originated from Mr. David Whitford's personal account and was directed to a subaccount opened under the plaintiff's name. However, However, that account was opened and controlled solely by the defendant, Mrs. Clara Whitford. Mr. Whitford was not aware of these distinctions. The judge's expression hardened. He turned his gaze to Clara. Under the bench's fluorescent lights, her hands shook. Her nails, once perfect, dug into her palms. Laura continued, under our state's elder protection laws, this conduct clearly meets the criteria for financial exploitation. We ask this court to compel full repayment with interest, to bar the defendant from managing or accessing any financial accounts belonging to Mr. Whitford, and to mandate corrective education. No one spoke for a long moment. I could hear the wall clock ticking behind the judge. Steady, unforgiving. Finally, the judge lifted his head, voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. After reviewing the documents, testimony, and timelines, this court finds that the defendant, Mrs. Clara Ann Whitford, intentionally diverted funds intended for her mother-in-law's support and misrepresented her actions to both her husband and the plaintiff. The court orders full repayment of $40,000 to the plaintiff, plus applicable interest and fees. Removal of the defendant from any financial management responsibilities or access to Mr. Whitford's personal or business accounts. Mandatory participation in a financial ethics and rehabilitation program. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck once, twice, 3 times. Each knock sounded like a door closing. Clara sagged into her chair. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not the soft, manipulative ones I'd seen before, but hot, cornered ones. She turned to David, voice cracking. You have to believe me, she whispered. I didn't mean to. But David's eyes were empty. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he turned his gaze away, toward the floor, toward nothing. My heart cracked open. Not from regret, from the cost. To reclaim justice, I had to watch my son lose his marriage. The future I once imagined for him, a loving wife, a warm home, shared trust, had been buried somewhere under bank statements and forged forms. Laura touched my shoulder gently. You did the right thing, Helen, she said softly. You didn't just protect yourself. You saved your son from a lifetime of being used. I nodded, but my mouth couldn't form a smile. Justice, I realized then, is a double-edged sword. It cuts through lies, but it can also slice through the delicate threads of family. When I stepped outside, the sky finally opened. Rain poured down, heavy and cold, splashing against the courthouse steps and breaking into 1,000 tiny drops. I stood under the awning for a moment, letting the damp air wash over my face. There were no cheers, no applause, only the quiet peace of knowing I had walked the full circle of truth. I whispered into the rain, as if speaking to my son wherever his thoughts were in that moment. David, I don't know if you'll forgive me for dragging all this into the light, but I couldn't let them take the one thing I could never afford to lose, the truth. The rain kept falling as I walked away, step by slow step, leaving behind the courthouse. Just a mother with a tired heart, a worn notebook, and a dignity she had finally refused to surrender. And if you're still here with me, listening to this part of my journey, maybe in your own quiet room, remember this. Sometimes justice doesn't look like victory. Sometimes it looks like a woman walking alone in the rain, heartbroken but unbroken. After the trial, my house returned to a quiet that almost didn't feel real. No more sudden knocks, no more calls from lawyers or banks, just the old clock on the wall and the strip of sunlight that crawled across my living room floor every afternoon, picking up tiny flecks of dust as it moved. Days slipped into weeks, weeks slid into months. David didn't call. No messages, no emails, no "how are you, Mom?" I didn't chase him. I knew my son well enough to understand that he was trying to survive the wreckage of what used to be his marriage. Sometimes being a mother means knowing when to hold on, and when to let silence do the work you cannot. On some nights when the moonlight crossed the window pane and painted a silver stripe across the table, I would pick up my phone and scroll to his name, David Whitford. My thumb would hover over the call button. Just one tap, I think. One tap, and I'd hear his voice, but I never pressed it. I would just look, then set the phone down and whisper a small prayer for him instead. One morning in June, an email from the bank pinged in my inbox. A simple subject line: deposit completed successfully. I opened it slowly. $40,000. Restitution. The money my son had meant for me all along. The money Clara had swallowed whole in my name. I thought I would feel joy, relief, vindication. Instead, I just stared at the numbers and felt strangely hollow, like someone had cleaned out a room inside me and left it bare. If that money had been a tool of deceit, I thought, then it couldn't just sit there. It had to become something else now. Something good. I used a small part of it to patch the leaking roof, replace the threadbare curtains, and finally buy a proper heater so the winter nights wouldn't creep into my bones. Just enough to make the house feel safe again. Just enough to remind myself I was allowed to be comfortable. Then I made 2 calls. One to Reverend Matthews, one to Laura. We met in the parish office a week later. The room smelled of old wood, coffee, and candle wax melting down in slow, soft circles. I don't want this money to sit in an account with Clara's shadow on it, I told them, my hands wrapped around a warm mug. I want to turn it into something that lifts other people up instead of pulling them down. I want to help seniors who have been used by their own families. People like me. We tossed around names for a while. Foundations, funds, projects. In the end, I said quietly, what about Honest Hands Foundation? Hands that give, hands that protect, hands that don't take what isn't theirs. Reverend Matthews smiled behind his glasses. Helen, this isn't just kindness, he said softly. This is how God sometimes turns pain into a doorway for others. Laura, ever the practical one, had already opened her notebook. We'll register it as a non-profit, she said. I'll handle the paperwork and compliance. The Reverend can represent the community side. And you, Helen, she looked up at me with a small, proud smile. You'll be the founder. I let out a soft, incredulous laugh, squeezing my coffee cup to steady myself. I don't feel like a founder, I said. I'm just a mother who finally learned how to stand up. 3 months later, Honest Hands Foundation officially opened. Our first office was the basement of St. Mark's Church. 3 mismatched desks, an old printer that coughed more than it worked, a second-hand filing cabinet, and a wooden sign hanging by the door that read, "Helping the Forgotten Speak Again." Every week, new faces found their way down those steps. An older woman whose daughter had tricked her into signing over the deed to her house, a 70-year-old man whose grandson had drained his pension through a joint account, an 80-year-old widow whose son-in-law had forged her signature on a bank loan. Each story was a wound, some still bleeding, some barely scarred. At first, I thought I would cry with every person who sat across from me, but over time, I learned how to do something different. I learned how to hold their hands, listen without flinching, and tell them what I had lived, that the truth doesn't always save you quickly, but it always arrives right on time. While I handled the heart work, as we called it, Laura chased grants and legal partnerships. She stayed up late writing proposals, met with organizations that supported elder justice, and trained volunteers on how to spot signs of financial abuse. Daniel stopped by whenever he could, helping us decode statements, trace shady transfers, and prepare files for people who were ready to fight back. One afternoon, as we were tidying up papers after a long day, the Reverend paused beside my desk. "Helen," he said quietly, "isn't it something? The very pain that almost crushed you is now a lantern for others." I smiled, feeling a strange warmth rise in my chest. Maybe that's how God rewrites endings, I said, not by erasing the betrayal, but by giving the betrayed a way to stand for someone else. As Honest Hands grew, word began to spread. Reporters called. A local station wanted to feature the brave mother who took her daughter-in-law to court. One magazine asked if I'd tell my story for a full-page article. There was even talk of a book. I turned them all down. I don't want to become a headline, I told Laura when she asked why. Justice can stand in the light, but healing I think needs a quieter room. She nodded slowly. You're right, she said. Some things are too sacred to turn into content. At night, a new ritual settled into my life. I would set a small candle on the table near the window, beside a framed photo of David and me. He was maybe 10 in that picture, freckles across his nose, grinning with both front teeth missing. I'd light the candle and watch the tiny flame throw a soft glow across that young, innocent face. Where are you, David? I would whisper. I'm not angry, son. I just hope you've learned something from all this pain. The candlelight would flicker, and for a moment, it always looked like his smile moved. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't forgetting. It was choosing not to live the rest of your life chained to the wound someone else gave you. Sometimes the Reverend would ask, Helen, have you really forgiven Clara? I would think for a long moment before answering. Maybe I have, I'd say slowly, because I don't want her to suffer anymore. I don't lie awake wishing her harm. But forget. I'd shake my head. No, the heart can forgive, but the memory has its own job to do. He would smile gently. You're still the strong Helen I've always known. One crisp autumn morning, I stood on the porch watering my lavender when Laura's car pulled up. She got out with an envelope in hand, her smile brighter than usual. Our foundation just received a grant from the Elder Justice Coalition, she said. They want a long-term partnership. I took the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside was formal language, a dollar amount, and a promise of ongoing support. A year ago, I had been counting coins to buy canned soup, surviving on church deliveries and kind neighbors. Now I was helping others reclaim what had been stolen from them. I didn't cry. I just smiled. A small, real smile, soft as mist. And yet at night, when the house grew very quiet, I sometimes heard the wind brush against the door. If I closed my eyes, it almost sounded like my son's voice on the other side. I knew he wasn't ready yet. Maybe he was still trying to forgive himself. Maybe his silence was the only way he knew how to carry his guilt. I didn't blame him. I waited, not because I needed him to fix me, but because I wanted the truth of all of this to come full circle, for both of us. I believed that one day, when he finally knocked, I would still open the door. Not because I had forgotten what happened, but because I had learned how to love without letting it destroy me. One night, rain poured from dusk till almost midnight. Wind lashed at the windows, rattling the glass glass and knocking over one of the small lavender pots I had brought inside. I was sitting by the window reviewing files for an upcoming Honest Hands meeting when I heard a knock. Soft but insistent. A knock that carried the chill of the storm with it. I glanced at the clock. It was past 10. At my age, people don't knock at that hour unless something is wrong. I rose slowly, my heart beating faster, and walked to the door. My hand shook just a little as I turned the latch. The door flew open with a wind, and rain sprayed across my slippers. There, standing on my front step, drenched from head to toe, was David. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His eyes were red and hollow. His shoulders trembled like a boy who had finally run out of places to hide. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I've been so stupid." Before I could say a word, he stepped inside and dropped to his knees on the wet floor. A broken sob ripped out of him, raw and unguarded. He buried his face in his hands, his whole body shaking. For a heartbeat, I just looked at him. My son, the boy I had once taught to tie his shoes, to say please and thank you, to tell the truth even when it hurt. Now he was a grown man, shattered in the very house where I had taught him those lessons. I knelt down beside him, placed my hand gently on his shoulder, and spoke softly. "Get up, David," I whispered. "Everyone stumbles. Forgiveness isn't pretending it never happened. It's choosing not to stay lying in the mud." He lifted his head, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he choked out. "I doubted you. I believed her. I stayed silent while you suffered. Mom, I lost everything." I guided him to the sofa, fetched a towel, and began drying his hair the way I had when he was a child. Slow, gentle, as if any sudden move might break this fragile moment of return. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly. "I just need you to remember that truth never arrives late. It waits in the doorway until we're brave enough to open it." He stared at the fireplace where a small flame flickered and popped. Outside, the rain beat against the windows like a hurried heart. After a while, he whispered, "Clara's gone, Mom." I paused, the towel resting in my hands. "She emptied the last of the savings," he continued, "took what she could from the business, then disappeared. They say she left with some man she knew before we ever married." I closed my eyes. No anger, just a deep, quiet sadness, the kind that knows the storm has already done its damage. "I tried calling her," he said, "texting, looking for her, but she's gone. The last message she left me said, 'You trusted the wrong person.'" I took his hand in mine. It was warm and shaking. "No, son," I said, "you trusted the right thing. You just handed it to the wrong person. Even when trust is broken, it's still what separates us from those who deceive." He leaned his head against my shoulder and let out a long, shuddering breath. "I've lost everything, Mom," he murmured. "My money, my marriage, my pride." I stroked his hair, feeling my own heart ache and heal at the same time. "No," I said softly. "What you found tonight is worth more than all of that. You found the part of yourself that can admit when it's wrong and still choose what's right. Not everyone finds that." The rain finally began to fade sometime near midnight. I made him a cup of ginger tea, and we sat together in the soft light of the living room, saying little, the air warm with steam and wood smoke. "I don't understand how you can be so calm after everything," he said at last. I smiled faintly. "Because I know now that justice isn't about making someone pay," I answered. "It's about restoring balance. Clara reaped what she sowed, and you, my son, you're finally planting something new." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said in a low voice, "Mom, can I help with a foundation? Honest Hands. I want to do something that matters. I don't want to live the way I used to." My throat tightened. "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded. "Of course. I need to relearn how to use money to heal instead of to hurt." "Then come on Saturday," I said. "The Reverend will be glad to see you. So will I." From that day on, David showed up at Honest Hands every weekend. He arrived early with coffee for everyone, rolled up his sleeves, and sat beside me as we organized files, drafted letters, and reviewed new cases. Some days he helped Daniel untangle complicated statements. Other days he went with Laura to meet elderly victims, listening quietly as they shared their stories. People say time heals. For me, it wasn't time. It was watching my son choose a different path with his own 2 feet. One morning, I looked across the room and saw him leaning over a spreadsheet, brow furrowed in concentration, the sunlight catching the brown in his hair. For a moment, I didn't see the businessman, the betrayed husband, the man who had once doubted me. I saw my little boy again, the one who used to help me wash dishes, the one who once asked, "Mom, what does honesty really mean?" "David," I called softly. He looked up. "Yeah, Mom. You've walked through your own storm," I said, smiling. "Not everyone has the courage to do that." He smiled back, a real smile this time. "If it weren't for you," he said, "I'd still be drowning in guilt." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "I didn't save you," I replied. "You saved yourself. I just left the light on." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, tapping softly against the basement window. The same door he had once knocked on in a storm now stood open every weekend. In that moment, I understood something clearly. Life, no matter how broken, always leaves a door open for those who want to return. Weeks turned into months. Honest hands grew. We moved from the church basement into a small shared office building. The walls filled with thank you cards, photos, and a simple framed quote Laura hung by the front door. Truth doesn't need applause. It just needs a place to stand. One spring morning, while the lavender on my porch was in full bloom, the phone rang. A woman's cheerful voice came through the line. "Mrs. Helen Whitford," she asked. "I'm calling on behalf of the Texas Council for Senior Advocacy. You've been selected for our Heart of Justice Award for your work with honest hands. We'd be honored if you'd speak at next week's ceremony." I froze for a moment, not out of pride but disbelief. A year ago, I was a widow living off church food drives. Now, someone somewhere was calling me a symbol of quiet justice. Life, I thought, has strange ways of turning when you refuse to give up on the truth. The ceremony was held at the city courthouse, in a grand hall with high ceilings and long windows. I wore a simple light blue dress, the same one I'd worn to church on Easter. No glitter, no pretense. When I stepped onto the stage, applause rose and swelled around me. I scanned the crowd and saw David in the second row, wearing a white shirt, his eyes shining with a pride I hadn't seen since he was small. The host introduced me as the founder of Honest Hands Foundation, a woman who turned personal pain into a voice for others. I walked to the wooden podium, my hands trembling just a little, but my voice clear. "Thank you," I began. "But tonight, I'm not here to tell you my story. I'm here to tell you the story of an unnamed mother. A mother who was deceived by the woman her son brought home, who lost not only her money, but for a time, her trust." The hall went still. People leaned in. I could almost feel their hearts listening. "I once thought that when someone betrays you, the best revenge is silence," I continued. "But I learned something different. When someone steals your trust, the way to take it back is not with hate, not with shouting, but with truth. Because truth holds a power no punishment ever can." The applause that followed was long and gentle. It rolled over me like a warm tide. I paused, taking a deep breath. In the front row, David wiped at his eyes. The sight almost broke me, not because I pitied him, but because I knew he finally understood. When I spoke again, my voice softened. "Justice isn't just what happens in court," I said. "It begins the moment you find the courage to say enough, even when the person hurting you is someone you love. That may be the bravest decision any mother, any father, any human being will ever make." After the ceremony, there were photos, handshakes, and bouquets I could barely carry. I don't remember every face that came up to me, but I remember the feeling in my chest. No bitterness, no hunger for revenge, just a deep, quiet peace. As I stepped outside, light rain began to fall, as if the Texas sky couldn't resist blessing the moment. The drops glimmered under the streetlights, and for once, the rain didn't feel cold. David came up beside me and draped his jacket over my shoulders. "Mom," he said softly, "I've never seen you shine like this." I squeezed his hand. "It's not because of the award, son," I answered. "It's because you're here, and because now you truly understand what honesty costs, and what it saves." He nodded, eyes still misty. "I do, Mom," he said, "and I promise I'll live by it." That night back home, I sat at my desk and opened the worn journal that had followed me through this whole journey. On the last page, I wrote one final line. "A mother's greatest victory isn't winning a case. It's teaching her child the value of truth." I closed the book and listened to the wind outside. The faint scent of rain clung to the roof. On the table, a small candle flickered beside a family photo. Mark, me, and little David. 3 faces in one frame. 3 lives tied together by one simple belief. Love doesn't disappear. It changes form. It becomes courage. It becomes boundaries. It becomes the strength to rise when someone tries to break you. And if you're still with me, listening to this from your own quiet room, I want to say this. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of my story. If you've ever faced injustice or betrayal inside your own family, and it left a mark on your heart, share a piece of it in the comments. You never know, your story today might be the light that helps someone else stand up tomorrow. And if you believe, as I do now, that the truth will always find its way home, no matter how long it takes, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me for the next stories. I'll keep telling you about women, about mothers, about people who were broken but refused to stay that way, people who rose again through the quiet power of justice and the stubborn, gentle force of love. From Texas, this is Helen, and this is my truth.